Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar out of the summer school series. We talked about pdfToolbox, desktop, an introduction last week. This week we're going to talk about 3 products. I'll try to keep things as structured as possible. What I wanted to do is talk about all of the different automation solutions we have in our portfolio at 4Ps. So as I said, we have at the moment 3 different solutions in our portfolio that you could all classify as automation solutions. And I'm using a Callas template for my presentation today. You could say that that is not correct, but in a sense it is, because the first product is pdfToolbox Server from Callas, and the other 2 automation solutions that I'm going to be talking about both use pdfToolbox Server or pdfToolbox CLI, the command line version to be exact. They use that as an engine to handle PDF files and perform a number of different tasks with PDF files. So the first item you see on the list, pdfToolbox Server, is both an automation product by itself. It can do a range of tasks by itself, but it also is used in tFLOW production from a company called Tucana and in FileTrain from a company called Laidback Solutions. What I'll do during this webinar is I will go over the 3 solutions. I will demo the 3 solutions. I'll keep it very, very high level in my demo. We won't have time to go into details of these individual products, but I will at the end, and then hopefully that will already become a little bit clear during the demo itself, I will at the end summarize what I think is the difference between those 3 products. And if you are looking at the solution or you have customers looking at an automation solution, which direction you should go in and which questions you should ask yourself to decide which of these products might work the best in your environment. So that's the goal of today, if you want. Let me hide PowerPoint for a second, and we'll take this to product demonstration. And the first product I need is pdfToolbox. What you see on screen is pdfToolbox Desktop, which is the operator version, the manual version of the product. But I have opened the pdfToolbox Server window. As I've said in many other webinars in the meantime, the desktop version for pdfToolbox actually is the user interface for the automated version. And what you can see here is that I have launched a local server. So I have a server that can handle hot folders or process hot folders. And I've installed that on the same machine as the desktop. Could be a different solution if I wanted to. But for this demo, it's simply all on the same machine. And you see a number of different lines with names on them. Each of those is a job in pdfToolbox Server speak, or a hot folder configuration if you want. And what I can do is open one of these. I have a little gear icon at the right-hand side of the name of that job. And that brings up an Edit Job menu that allows me to look at the properties of that setup. What you can see here is very simple, and this is how all of the different folders or jobs work in pdfToolbox Server. What you can see here is that a job has a name, it has a profile. Now, if I want the job to do what the name implies, then I'd better select a different profile, so I can look for something that includes PDFX 1A. And let me choose an ISO-coated. Oh, that's pdfX3. That's not what I wanted. This is the one that I wanted. So this is a profile that will verify and even convert, in this case, to pdfX1A. So I have a name, I have the profile that will be used, and then I have a number of folders. And of course, there is an input folder, and that is the folder that pdfToolbox Server will be monitoring. Any file that is dropped into the input folder is automatically picked up. It's processed with the profile that I have selected, and in the end, it is going to be moved to one of the output folders. Which of these output folders? Well, that depends on the result of that pre-flight. If everything goes well, so I have no errors in that file, then in this case, I have selected an output folder for the, make that a little bigger, an output folder that is called success. And that could be a folder where the next step in my production workflow picks up files that are good for production. If there are errors during pre-flight, so if the file contains problems that cannot be fixed with the profile that I have selected, then it is going to be moved into the error folder, and I'm going to generate a report. And I have different types of reports that I can generate. So what does pdfToolbox Server allow me to do in a very short summary? Well, it allows me to set up these jobs where each job has an input folder and multiple output folders. And for each job, I can specify a profile to use, process plan to use, which is like a profile, except that it can combine multiple steps and it has some conditional processing that I can choose. Or I can choose an action. And an action is something like save images, which you see here, or step and repeat business cards. So an imposition, a merge, a split, saving images, creating EPS, all of these things are actions. It's very powerful by itself, and I can set up as many of these jobs as I want. But if you're thinking about using pdfToolbox Server as an automation solution, then you also have to realize that that is the limit to where it goes. pdfToolbox will allow you to have these PDF files dropped into an input folder, and then run an action on them, and it will put the result in an output folder associated with that job. The expectance then is that you have some sort of workflow that is in place where those files will be dropped in the correct input folder by that other workflow component, and that once pdfToolbox Server has processed the file, that the result files will be picked up by some process in the rest of the workflow. So pdfToolbox Server, in that sense, is one part of a larger workflow. And what we see is that in most cases, you need additional logic around pdfToolbox Server to implement a complete workflow. So this is just a component, be it an important component, but it is in most cases, or in many cases, just a component in a larger production workflow. Now, that logic that I talked about can be provided in two different ways. First of all, when I had pdfToolbox Server on the slide, I also added CLI SDK on that line, which stands for command line version, or software development kit version, and those are two versions that can be used by developers in a scripting language or in a higher development programming language, can be used by developers to implement additional logic with that pdfToolbox engine. So if I have a website environment, for example, I can use the CLI from PHP scripts or whatever other website scripting language that I use, and implement the rest of my production logic in scripting. So that is certainly a possibility, but if I stick to pdfToolbox Server, to the hot folder interface, then I am limited to this concept of having an input folder and an output folder. That is not bad by itself. I'm just trying to explain what the limitations are of this product, and that will make it very clear what then can be added by tFLOW production and by FileTrain on top of this. Let me hide pdfToolbox for a minute, and what I will do is I will go to the next product in line. I've already launched the server component of tFLOW production, which is called Turbine. And as you can see, the server allows me to do some setup, including pointing to where pdfToolbox is installed and a number of other pieces of information. It also allows me to see what kind of setup I have. It has licensing information, and it defines hot folders on a server level. But the turbine is not that interesting by itself. What we will do is we'll start the client application that comes with tFLOW production, and that will show you exactly what the added value is of tFLOW production over just using pdfToolbox server. Because this is a client server application, what I first need to do is log in, and I could log in as a user or as an administrator. In this case, I want to be able to show all of the functionality, so I'm going to log in as an administrator. And immediately you can see that the user interface you have here is much more, on the one hand, complex, but especially much more visual than what you have in pdfToolbox server. tFLOW production also works on a hot folder level. And what you see on the left-hand side is input folders, and on the right-hand side are output folders. But it offers a whole range of functionality on top of that. And again, I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I do want to give you an idea of what the possibilities are so that you can compare with pdfToolbox server. If I click on one of these input folders to begin on the input side, again, I have a little gear icon here, and if I click that, I open the setup for that input folder. And the first thing that you can see is something that is called the kfpx file, and that is actually a pre-flight profile from pdfToolbox, the same type of pre-flight profile than the ones I selected in pdfToolbox server. So at least that part is the same. This is the same pre-flight and correction engine that you have underneath the product. But you can see that in this case, I also have, separately from that, I have color conversion capabilities. So I can already set up some color conversion next to running that pre-flight profile. And I have something that is called workflow links, which allows me to link this input folder to a number of the output folders I have defined on the right-hand side. Conceptually, that means that as soon as a file enters one of the input folders, one of the hot folders for this banner workflow, that file will automatically be sent to these three output folders. So I've set up a completely automated workflow where I have one file in, and I automatically create three different output files on the output side. And I have the ability to send out some email notification as soon as a file enters into this input folder as well. So that's on the input side. It's still relatively similar to what you have in pdfToolbox server. You can run a pre-flight profile that can do quality control and that can fix. And then I had these other capabilities to create one-to-many workflows in tFLOW production. If I look on the output side, I also have this gear icon next to each of these output flows. And if I select, for example, the sign-off sheet output flow, well, what you can see is that I can again run a pre-flight profile on the output side. And this, of course, is very useful because in many cases you want to create a specific PDF file for a particular type of output. Just to give one example, if I am to generate an online preview or a proof that I want to use online or email to a customer, then perhaps in this profile, I'm going to want to change the resolution of images to make the file small enough so that it fits in an email. I'm going to want to change the compression that I use on images. I might want to convert everything to sRGB rather than leave it as CMYK. So this second profile that you have, the one that is specific for an output queue, allows you to do further processing of that PDF specifically for that output queue. Next to that, I also have the capability of renaming a file. I have a much wider range of color operations I can do, not just with ICC profiles, but also running device link profiles. This is very useful if, for example, I want to do something like a reduction of total ink coverage, or I want to go to real ink saving. It's possible using a device link profile, and this gives me a very nice way of running that as part of an automated workflow. But it goes further than that. Again, I have the capability of sending out an email, but now I also have the capability of automatically uploading that file to an FTP server as part of that output process, and even to automatically run an imposition as part of that output process. So you can see that using tFLOW production gives me a lot more flexibility in how I can configure the different tasks that need to happen with PDF files that enter my workflow. I still, if I cancel this, I still pick them up through hot folders, but now instead of having one input and one output as I had on the pdfToolbox server side, I have the ability to link one input with a number of different output profiles. So create a one-to-many workflow where I generate multiple PDF files to handle multiple parts or different parts of my production workflow. That is one big difference between the pdfToolbox server product and tFLOW production. But it goes further than that. There are a number of other differences that I want to highlight. The first is how these files can come into my workflow. And I already mentioned these hot folders, and if I go back to the Turbine, remember that that is the server application for tFLOW production. If I go back to the Turbine for a second, then you can see that each of these input queues and each of the output queues can have one or multiple hot folders associated with it. So I'm not limited to one single hot folder for one of these queues. I could actually have 10 input sources or generate the output in 2 different locations if I wanted to do so. So that's already an sometimes important change if you're trying to set up a workflow that is a little bit flexible. The other difference is that tFLOW production comes with plugins for the Creative Suite from Adobe. And that allows you to create your file in InDesign, for example, and then at the end of that creation process, use that plugin to automatically send a PDF to one of these input folders. So not only do I have multiple hot folders that can be checked, but I can also do other things than hot folders. I can use these plugins for Creative Suite, and that will allow me to send those files or have those files automatically sent from InDesign into my production application. But the most important difference, perhaps, is the user interface. And that should be obvious by just looking at it. tFLOW production is much more visual as an application than pdfToolbox server is. Yes, there is a little window in pdfToolbox server that will show you which files were processed by the application. But what you can see here is that any file that enters the application is stored in this repository. So I can get an overview of all of the files that were processed, or I can limit it in time and say I only want to save files for a week or for a day. But I can get that visual overview of all of the files. And if I select a file in that repository, at the bottom here, I have an overview of properties for that file, of metadata that is embedded in that file, and even a list of all of the corrections, and if there were any errors, all of the errors that were listed by the pre-flight process when the file came into tFLOW production. So I have this extra information on those documents that I can see in my repository. And if I double click on a document, then you can see that there is a larger preview that you can get. I can even look at individual separations, I can zoom in, or I could go into an imposition preview and say, go to imposition. I want to do that same sign off, for example. It's going to take a few seconds to generate a preview image of that. But so for files that I have in the repository, I can not only look at all of the details of those files, but I can even go as far as doing ad hoc impositions on those documents. And I could now grab that preview and simply drop it on any of the output queues that I want. For example, this proofing queue. And that would give me a proof of that imposed document. tFLOW production not only gives you a more versatile workflow still based on pdfToolbox, but it also adds a number of additional functionalities around pdfToolbox, such as that visual user interface, the ability to work both in a fully automatic way and a manual way if I don't want to do automated workflows, the ability to show to the people working with the workflow which documents were processed and have them handled manually if they feel more comfortable doing that for certain documents than that fully automatic workflow. So it adds all of these things on top of what pdfToolbox Server can already do. That's all very nice. And then the question is, if this is such a flexible application that adds so much functionality on top of pdfToolbox Server, then why do you need a third solution in your portfolio, and what does FileTrain offer on top of what tFLOW production already offers? And the answer is not so much what it adds on top. It's much more a question about paradigm for this application. tFLOW production is a very visual tool, and it's also a very user-friendly tool that is critical to this application. Everything that you see here is easy to set up and easy to understand by someone who works in a typical production workflow. With that focus on usability and user-friendliness also comes, almost as a necessity, comes the fact that the functionality is necessarily somewhat limited. The flexibility, which is larger than what you have in pdfToolbox Server, is still limited in tFLOW production. And you can see that tFLOW production implements a particular workflow. You get files either from those plugins for a Creative Suite or through a hot folder, you have them in a repository, and then you generate output files. And you can generate multiple output files, but that's still what happens. You have an input, some operations that work on that document, and you have an output. What happens if what I want to do is, instead of the ability to simply add a prefix or a suffix to files, what happens in a workflow where I want to add a unique ID in front of every file that enters my workflow? What happens if I want to generate a certain type of document, email that to someone, then generate something else, and then email it to someone else? What happens if I not only want to generate output PDF files in these output queues, but I also need two forms of EPS and maybe a thumbnail to use on my website and a larger preview to send off in an email? The fact that tFLOW production is so user-friendly necessarily limits its flexibility to what you have here in this user interface. And if this is enough, if the flexibility you have in tFLOW production is enough for what you need in your workflow, then this is a great tool. It is very easy to install, it's very easy to configure, it's very easy to maintain. It gives you a perfect overview of all of the files that are being processed. So it's a great tool from that point of view. But because of that, it also comes with a number of limitations. And if we now hide tFLOW production and we go to FileTrain, then you'll see that FileTrain uses a completely different concept. It gives you a lot more flexibility than what you have in pdfToolbox Server or in tFLOW production, but that flexibility comes at a cost. And the cost is that the application is more difficult to set up and configure. More difficult, let me put it another way, the barrier to start making workflows in FileTrain is higher than that barrier in tFLOW production because it is not as visual as what you have in tFLOW production. So meanwhile, I've switched to a virtual Windows machine. FileTrain runs on Windows and on Mac. That's not the issue. But for this demo, I was running too many things on Mac already, and I wanted to keep it simple and run this in a Windows environment. FileTrain is, again, a regular application. It has a user interface that lets me create and manage and configure what is called here stations, basically workflows. And it can be run either as just an application, or it can be run as a true service so that nobody needs to be logged in while processing. And on the right-hand side, you can already see all kinds of activity going on in the different stations that I have created. What is the concept here? Well, FileTrain is an automation solution that allows you to create different workflows, as many workflows as you want. And I have some examples of these workflows here. What I built is something that we also saw in the pdfToolbox server example. I built an example workflow that takes in files and that will attempt to convert them to PDFX1A. What does that mean? Well, I can look at these stations, and if I double click, you can see that a station consists of different parts. I have a name and a description. The important parts are the sources that I have here and the filters and actions window at the bottom. How does this work? Well, first of all, each FileTrain station, when it's active, will process files from any of the different input sources that are defined in that station. And as you can see here, an input source can be a regular folder. And now we're in the same category as what we could do for pdfToolbox server or for tFLOW production. This is a hot folder that is watched by FileTrain, and any file that is dropped in here is processed. You can see a change already where in pdfToolbox server and in tFLOW production, there wasn't too much configuration or customization you could do for these input folders. What I can do here is scan subfolders. I can define how frequently that folder is checked, and that can be very simple. This is a test workflow, so I've set it to 1 second, which basically means immediately. But I can also configure it to only check this hot folder at a particular time on a Monday, for example. Or I can set it to only check daily, or I can set it to only check every 5 days. So the amount of customization that you have here is much, much more extensive than what you find in pdfToolbox server or in tFLOW production. That doesn't mean it's better or worse than the other products, but if you have a need to build a very flexible workflow, then FileTrain will allow you to build that flexibility. Now, I'm also not limited to folders. I can have a station that checks one or more email servers and collects emails and does something with the attachments that are attached to those emails, which would allow clients to simply send me an email, and the files that they attach would be picked up and processed. So that's another way to get files in one of these stations. Or, as you can see as well, I could configure an FTP server and check a particular folder or multiple folders on an FTP server, perhaps with subfolders again. And again, I have all of the customizability to determine how frequently that is checked and so on. And because I have all of these different input sources, a station in that sense is already more customizable and much more powerful than what I have in these other two applications. Now I can really configure this to pick things up from different locations and then enter them into the production workflow. These are a number of sources that pick up files from different locations. What I also want to at least point out is that there is something like a timer source. So not only can I launch a station and have it collect files from different locations, I could also say, well, I'm going to build a workflow that is automatically started every hour or every day or every week, and that then does a number of actions. What could that be? Well, assume that you have files that are gathered into folders because of some process. People send you information, that information is processed. Well, you could set up a station that once a week cleans up those folders and moves everything to archive and then frees up space in those input folders. So I can build cleanup, archival, whatever other workflows that you want on a timer basis as well. So in all, much more flexible than what you have available in, for example, tFLOW production. Then next, once I have these sources, and so files are now coming into that station, I get to define filters, and a filter determines which files are going to be picked up from those different sources and what actions are going to be executed on those files. And in this case, I have configured something that doesn't completely make sense, I think, but it is an example station to show you what the different possibilities are. Let me look at that first filter. It's a very simple one. It will process all files that are a PDF. And then if a file is PDF and it is picked up by that filter, then it will be sent to a convert to pdfX1A with pdfToolbox action, and then an archive action. So each PDF file that FileTrain finds in any of those sources will be converted to pdfX1A, and it will be archived afterwards. To show you what that action looks like, this is very familiar. This is a pdfToolbox action. pdfToolbox is integrated into FileTrain, as I said. This is a pdfToolbox action that allows me to select a profile. If I go to reports, it allows me to specify which pre-flight reports I want to generate. And I've set it up so that I only get a report on error. And what the type of report is a PDF with annotations in it. I include the overview, and I want to downsample the original document that the annotations are put on top. And then I can specify where that report is generated. I can automatically create subfolders. I could create subfolders with the current date in it if I wanted to, and I'm going to rename the report so that it's the original file name and then underscore report. So again, a very flexible way to set up what type of report I want, where I want to generate it, what its name should be, and so on. And because I simply have a list here, I can have as many of these as I want. So I could say I also always want an XML, and then an XML report. An XML report can have the same name, and I'll call it .xml. And that I want to generate somewhere else so that it can be picked up by some other process that comes after this action. Flexibility to define what kind of reporting is done, and also flexibility to define where the resulting file is going to end up. In this case, I've done something very simple. If everything goes well, it is sent to good for production. If it is not going very well, then it is sent to be looked at. But I have an advanced setup that I can use where I can specify for each of the different situations that pdfToolbox can encounter. I can specify a different output folder, a different name, or different subfolders that result needs to be stored in. So this action is actually quite powerful. And then the last action that I have here is a simple archive action that will move that file into an archive folder. And again, I have these name change and subfolder options if I want to use those. So that is what happens for all PDF documents in any of the input sources for this particular station. But then next to that, I also created an input, or a filter rather, for zip files. And zip files in this case are sent to an unzip action. And then, of course, if there are any PDF files in that zip, then those will be placed and converted further so that they go into the first action that you do. I also did something that is slightly more difficult because I am opening this up to people. I might run into situations where people have empty folders that are put somewhere. So if I process all of the files, I might be left with an empty folder. And what I've done here is say, if there is a folder, so basically folder name contains whatever you want, and if the size is 0, there are no files anymore in that folder, and if the modification time for that folder is larger than 1 minute, so in this case I'm looking at all of these restrictions in that filter, well, in that scenario, take some action on that folder, and the action that is taken in this case is simply to delete that folder from the input. Now, all of those are still more or less actions that happen with PDF, but you can make it much more comprehensive than that. In a workflow, typically, you not only have PDF files, you can also have other file formats. And I included an LPCal Claro action in my station just to show you that there is also that possibility to include other applications, automate other applications than pdfToolbox in a FileTrain station. And actually, if I go to Actions and I show you the full list of actions that you can add in one of those stations, you can see that there is not only a pdfToolbox and an LPCal Claro action, but I also have a whole other range of possibilities, including, for example, the capability to write a text file, the capability to insert XMP into an output file, zip or unzip, split and merge PDF files, run any file, any application that has a command line, connect to a database, and retrieve information from that database or store information in the database. So it's much wider than what you have in pdfToolbox Server or in tFLOW production. And that perhaps is the biggest difference between FileTrain as an automation solution and something like tFLOW production as an automation solution. Yes, both are based on the pdfToolbox server engine, and so both can handle the same pre-flight and correction capabilities or functionalities that you might want in your workflow. But in the case of tFLOW production, you end up with something that looks very visual, is somewhat limited, but very, very user-friendly, and where you have this balance between manual operations and automated operations. On the other hand, in FileTrain, you end up with something where the barrier to learn this application and to start building your own workflows or stations, as they are called, where that barrier is higher than in tFLOW production, but you have something that is also more versatile and more powerful than what you have on the tFLOW production side. So with that, let me hide the applications and go back to PowerPoint for a second. What I want to do is summarize this, and I've said much of this. I have included it in the slides so that you can review this afterwards as well. But basically, if you look at pdfToolbox or pdfToolbox Server, well, first of all, it's the engine behind the two other solutions. And in a somewhat negative way, I phrase it in a somewhat negative way, it is limited to either hot folder automation or being integrated through integration work, either with scripting if you have the CLI, or by development if you have the SDK. That automation, those automation capabilities that you have are mainly built on hot folders, and you can do some things that are more advanced than that by saying, well, I'm going to create multiple hot folders, and the output folder from one of them is going to be an input folder for another hot folder, so I have some cascading setup if you want. But you can see that the stronghold of pdfToolbox Server really is the processing of those files in all these different ways, all of the things that it can do with PDF files, with Office files, with PostScript and EPS, the imposition engine that you have in there. It's really the power of the engine that is the most important. If you have to build a complete workflow, then pdfToolbox will be a very good component in that workflow. But more than likely, you will need something else. And that something else might be integration work, or it might be one of these other two applications that we've looked at. If we take it to tFLOW production, what we've seen is that this is very easy to use. And let's face it, it's simply a beautiful user interface. It's very easy to understand, to maintain. The training on this product is almost zero because it is that user-friendly. What is also very nice is that it allows this mix of automatic and manual workflows. And in some environments, this is crucially important. If you have an environment where the people working there don't feel totally confident in having a fully automatic workflow where they have no control over, then tFLOW production can be a nice tool to introduce in such an environment. Yes, it can do full automatic workflows, and it can even do those a single file in multiple files out type of workflows that you very often need, but it can also be set up to do manual workflows, and the two can be mixed in the same tool. The fact that this is a client-server solution makes it very easy to set it up once and then have multiple people logging into it and seeing that beautiful user interface without the administrative overhead, and simply focusing on working with the files that are being processed. So on the one hand, it is very easy. On the other hand, that easiness does imply a number of constraints in terms of functionality. You have the pdfToolbox engine, you have these color logic device link profiles that are built in that allow you to do things like color transformations or tack reduction or ink saving. And then you have some additional functionality around that, like some email communication, uploading files to an FTP server, running the imposition engine that is inside of pdfToolbox. So some of the functionality around is there, but it is a predefined workflow. And if you look at tFLOW production and you try to imagine whether this would work in your environment or in the environment of one of your clients, keeping in mind that these constraints are there is very important in both directions. If your clients are unlikely to be able to set up something like FileTrain with its more complicated user interface, then tFLOW production might be a much better solution in that case. If your workflow requires a certain level of flexibility, then you might not find the possibilities you need in tFLOW production. So that really are the key things to look at when you decide whether or not tFLOW production is something that you need to look at or your client needs to look at. And if we then move to the last solution I talked about, the FileTrain product from Laidback Solutions, well, as I put it here much more elegantly, it has a higher learning curve. There definitely is some background to learn on how these input sources work and what the different configurations are that you can have, how to build a filter, what the different possibilities are around that, how to build actions and how to accomplish the things that you want in the workflow. There is that additional learning curve in the product, and the user interface is much less visual. So it is more something that a person in IT or someone who is used to managing production workflows will probably feel more at ease with FileTrain than someone standing in production and dealing with the files that pass through a production workflow from day to day. It is a different product. But on the flip side, this integrates, if you look at FileTrain, it integrates so much more functionality and it offers so much more flexibility than what you have in pdfToolbox Server and tFLOW Production. So it is a much more flexible workflow solution in that sense. It implements all of these additional tools like being able to get and send files to FTP and email, renaming them in all kinds of complex ways, zipping, unzipping, splitting and merging PDF files. All of that, those basic tools are readily available. It also automates LPCal Claro, it automates pdfToolbox, it automates anything that has a hot folder interface. It can automate anything that can work with command line. So if you have a number of other tools that you want to gather in a larger workflow, a very flexible, larger workflow, then FileTrain offers you those capabilities. And it contains a whole range of what you could consider more advanced capabilities. I already talked about the ability to write out text files. Well, for example, that would allow you to do dynamic impositioning using pdfToolbox. You can write out the imposition templates that you need on the fly. I could create HTML on the fly if I want to build a simple approval website, for example. And we've done that for our customers in the past. But I also have the ability to work with XML, to work with XMP. I have the ability to connect with databases. And FileTrain is really a one-in-all solution. So if you look at the product that I showed, then all of that functionality is embedded in that single package. If I go back to the opening slide, which of these tools is the best tool to automate your workflow? Well, there is only one absolute truth that I want to state, and that is if you're doing anything with pdfToolbox, then I think, and of course I'm not objective at all, but I think you should be looking at pdfToolbox. And whether that is pdfToolbox Server by itself for the hot folder functionality, or whether you put pdfToolbox inside of tFLOW Production and have that beautiful user interface around it, and that mix of automatic and semi-automatic workflows, or whether you want to put pdfToolbox in FileTrain and have the higher level of flexibility, that is a question I cannot answer. To answer that question, you have to look at your workflow, you have to look at the functionalities that you need, the flexibility that you need now and in the future, and you have to look at the people that will have to configure the solution, will have to maintain the solution, and will have to work with it. And all of those three factors might steer your decision in a different direction. That's almost the end of my time, and what I'm going to do is have a look at the questions that I saw coming in. If you have a question, then don't hesitate to enter that in your GoToWebinar control panel. You should have a section for that, and I'll go over those and try to get you an answer. The first and obvious question is FileTrain a competitor to InFocus Switch, and if so, what are the differences? Well, I think if you followed the demo for FileTrain that I gave here, you should already be able to answer some of that. First of all, the user interface interface between InFocus Switch and laid-back FileTrain is very, very different. And anyone who has seen Switch and compared it to FileTrain will have a very easy time to identify that. But maybe more important is that FileTrain is in many ways a more simple solution, in the sense that it is one product, it is not modular, it has all of the functionality built in, it offers a range of functionalities that in many cases are similar to what you can do with InFocus Switch, but it does so in a completely different user interface, user experience. Which one is better? They're really different tools. Again, they are different tools. And Switch is definitely capable to a number of things that you cannot accomplish with FileTrain. FileTrain has a number of things that Switch does not have. If you start comparing them, you also have to look at the commercial aspect. Switch is modular. The price depends on which modules you need. FileTrain is a single product with, I think, a very competitive price put on that. So while they try to solve the same problem, I think it's fair to say that they are still two very different products. Look at both of them and see which one of the two will correspond the best to what you need in a particular workflow. Again, I'm not going to say which of the two is best. They're very different. And spend some time with FileTrain to figure out what it can do and how it can do that, and how that then compares to what you can do with Switch. Does pdfToolbox has to be purchased separately when a user buys FileTrain or tFLOW production? It's a very good question. I'm not going to give exact prices, but you can definitely get those. But to give you an idea, pdfToolbox server is about 4,000 euros for the automated solution. So if you want to have the capability of using these hot folders or command line or SDK, you're going to spend about 4,000 euros on that product. tFLOW production is about 6,000 euros, and it includes the pdfToolbox engine. So in tFLOW production, it is built in. It is slightly more expensive than pdfToolbox server, which is because you get all of that additional functionality, of course, on top of the pdfToolbox server engine. And we're talking around 6,000 euros for that, just to give you an idea, order of magnitude. FileTrain, you're talking about the same order of magnitude. I think it's actually, both of them are actually close to 6,500 euros, if I'm correct. FileTrain does not include pdfToolbox server or Claro or any of the other tools that it can automate. So if you want something that is similar than tFLOW production, you will have to purchase FileTrain and you will have to purchase pdfToolbox server separately. Those two components together are also 6,000, 6,500. So it's basically around the same as what you would pay for tFLOW production. So from a commercial point of view, it's either 4,000 for the engine itself, or it's somewhere between 6,000 and 6,500 for the two other solutions if you want pdfToolbox included in both cases. But it is important that pdfToolbox is not included by default in FileTrain, so you can actually buy it separately. At that point, it would cost you 2,500 euros, and you can then use it to automate all kinds of other processes. You don't necessarily need to only use this in a workflow where you want to do pre-flight or fixing of PDF files and so on. So if you want to drive an image workflow or a video workflow, FileTrain would also be a solution for that. And again, at 2,500 euros, it's priced pretty competitively in that market. Also, good question actually. What is needed to get pdfA pilot to work with tFLOW and FileTrain? So for those of you who perhaps are not as familiar with pdfA pilot, Calas has two solutions. It has pdfToolbox, which is mainly oriented towards graphic arts, and then it has pdfA pilot, which is mainly oriented towards an archival market, and where the focus is on creating PDF for archival, archiving Office documents, archiving emails, all of those tasks. The engine in both cases is more or less the same, but Calas created two different product lines with sometimes slightly different functionalities because the market is different. Now, how could these work in a larger workflow? Well, with tFLOW production, it is not going to work. tFLOW production comes with pdfToolbox, and it is only capable of working with pdfToolbox. There again, you see the point, or this is an illustration, if you want, of the point that I was trying to make before. tFLOW production is a predefined workflow, and if you want to do something else, than what is predefined, then that's too bad. You will not be able to do that. So you cannot implement pdfA pilot inside of a tFLOW production workflow today. If you look at FileTrain, then FileTrain contains an action for pdfToolbox, but because FileTrain is capable of driving any tool that has a command line version, it would very easily be configured to work together with pdfA pilot. pdfA pilot has that same command line version that pdfToolbox has. So I could use the command line tool or action inside of FileTrain to drive anything inside of pdfA pilot that I wanted. So in that case, again, because FileTrain is the more flexible solution, you can do what you want in that regard, and you could very easily integrate that into an archival workflow. Last question that I see here, if you have any others, please do enter them, but last question that I see here, is ColorLogic also part of the tFLOW production license? Well, yes and no, Stefan. Let me go back to here for a second, and let me go to one of these output queues. So this is tFLOW production, and I'm looking at the properties of one of the output queues. Actually, the ColorLogic engine to process files is not included inside of tFLOW production. That's the first part. As you know, ColorLogic has a product called Zebra, which is a color server that manages files on a color level, so it can do stuff with ICC profiles, with spot color, curves, device link profiles, and so on. That color engine by itself is not embedded inside of tFLOW production. What is embedded in tFLOW production is, and there are two versions of this, in the standard tFLOW production product, you have a number of standard device link profiles, and those device link profiles are device link profiles created by ColorLogic. And then you have an extended version that also features all of these extended device link profiles and all of these ink-safe profiles. And once again, those profiles are created by ColorLogic and bundled inside of tFLOW production. They are run on the PDF files that are processed by pdfToolbox server. So it is the pdfToolbox engine that applies those device link profiles on the documents that are processed, but the profiles were generated by ColorLogic. And even with the additional commercial fee for using those extended profiles, such as the ink-safe profiles, that still gives you a very competitively priced product to do ink-save in a workflow. But so yes, as far as the device link profiles are concerned, no, as far as the actual ColorLogic processing engine is concerned. One more question: can FileTrain plus pdfToolbox be used for archiving purposes? Yes, absolutely. So when I talked about having two products that are based on more or less the same functionality, what that means is that if you look at pdfToolbox as a product, pdfToolbox also has the possibility to run all of the pdfA or PDF for archival profiles. So you can definitely use pdfToolbox to generate a pdfA file. And as such, I could simply use the pdfToolbox action inside of FileTrain to create a valid pdfA file. What might be missing, and that is important to understand if you're dealing with these two environments, but what might be missing is some of the more advanced functionality as far as pdfA pilot is concerned. For example, pdfA pilot added a capability to convert email files, .msg files, for example, or .eml files into valid pdfA. And it does a whole range of advanced functions to the attachments that come with that email. It can create PDF A1, A2, A3. It can put the attachments in as their original file format and or as a converted pdfA file by itself. So That's advanced PDFA functionality that you typically either first find in pdfA Pilot or only find in pdfA Pilot. So while the core pdfA capabilities are available inside of pdfToolbox, you might at some point find a need to use pdfA Pilot if you want to use some of the more advanced functionality inside of FileTrain. I hope that answers the question. For this question, for all other questions, if you have something that is specific to your workflow or you have a question that you don't want to share with the group, please feel free to send us an email afterwards. And like I said, if I go back to my presentation for a last second, as I said in the beginning, what I've done here is I've added email addresses for support, all of the websites for the companies that I talked about. You can download, of course, trial versions of all of these applications from our website, and you have all of the webinar recordings and a number of other tutorials on a tutorial page on our support website. So we'll publish the recording of this webinar. We will also publish this presentation so that you have all of these useful links as well. With that, I've come to the end of what I wanted to share with you during this summer school webinar. Just to remind you, this was the second webinar in this summer school series. Next week, again on Wednesday at 4 p.m., we have our next webinar, and in that one, we will play with color. We'll look at applications, the applications that we have in our portfolio that have functionalities surrounding color, and what the different possibilities would be and what opportunities would be to build the best workflow for each scenario, either for you or for your customers. Thank you very much for joining this webinar, and I am sure I will see a lot of you again next week for the next webinar in this series. Meanwhile, if you have any questions or you have any ideas or other topics that you would like us to talk about in a webinar, don't hesitate, just send us an email. And for now, have a great day.